Over the last 5 weeks, Lamar Jackson has 24 sacks and 10 interceptions. Is there any chance that you are thinking about benching him in this must-win fantasy matchup in Week 14? Matt, go ahead and start us off here. Are you thinking about possibly streaming a quarterback over Lamar Jackson, or are you just plugging him in confidently this week?
I mean, I think you play him. I mean, it depends on what's available to stream. For instance, if you were able to get Taysom Hill on waivers, then maybe you go that route. But I'm still going with Lamar Jackson. I still think he's a top 5 quarterback basically every week, almost regardless of matchup. Yeah, if you have him, I think you're starting him.
I agree with you, but I mean, it is certainly a little nerve-wracking when these wins become increasingly more important as we get close to the playoffs and seeing him just struggle week in and week out. Adam, are there any streamers that you would think about ahead of Lamar Jackson, or is he still a top 3, top 5 quarterback for you?
He's still a top 3, top 5 quarterback. You reached in the draft likely to take him right this season, and I can't imagine taking a guy with a mallet finger against the Jets with Alvin Kamara back over Lamar Jackson, Lamar Jackson at any point in time can rip off an 80-yard touchdown run. I remember from last season when I needed him to score like 40 points in a week, and he put up like 51 game because he just like ripped a 94-yard touchdown run from the 6. Like, that's the guy that I want to start week in and week out. I'm not even questioning that decision at all.
Yeah, especially in a division game. You know how those get. He's going to be playing a little with a little extra juice in his step this weekend, so I'm excited for that. We're going to cover that in a few more games, but before we get back into that game, let me just go through some quick introductions here. I want to thank everybody for tuning into episode 24 of the Launchpad. Last week I was with, well, not last week, last episode, because I took a couple weeks off, but last episode I was with Dwayne McFarland and Alex Caruso, and today I am with Matthew Freedman and Adam Koffler. Matt, let me go ahead and introduce you first. You are all over the place now over at FTN, Bets Media, Top Prop, Waffle House. Am I missing anything else, or did I just about cover all the introductions there?
No, that's sufficient. That is really the totality of who I am as a person. Those entities, especially Waffle House. Yeah. And I should just say, this past weekend, I actually did have my first waffle since Waffle House. It took multiple months for me to get back on the waffle wagon, but yeah. So that's who I am, a guy who eats waffles and sometimes talks about football.
Now, remind me, because I didn't watch. I did watch it live, but it's been a while now. I mean, it was just in the off season, but it feels like it was years ago at this point.
Does.
11, right? Was it 11 waffles? Is that what you
10?
Made it to?
It was 10. But my body was so numb at that point that if I had wanted to cram in probably another 3 at the end, I probably could have. But it's like, what's the point? I wanted to hit double digits, and so just stopping at 10 felt like the right move.
Yeah, ton of fun to watch. That was a very, very fun day. I was a part of all of those live, checking those out. So thanks for giving us some good entertainment during the off season. Down at the bottom, I'm joined with Adam Koffler. Anyone that's watched my shows before has probably seen Adam a couple times. Adam is a very good friend of mine. Adam and I came up together on the Fantasy Pros news desk, and now we're both kind of going our separate ways, but still keep in touch with each other. Formed a very good friendship over the years. Adam is still over at Fantasy Pros helping out on the news desk from time to time. He's also over at Rotoballer. He's got his show that is on the Action Network HQ. So, Adam, go ahead and let everyone know where they can find your show, where they can find your written content, and what you've got going on nowadays.
Yeah, even though we're talking football here, I do have a basketball podcast on the Action Network that comes out every Monday morning, and I write a weekly Risers and Fallers article for Rotoballer that I pin to my Twitter profile. You could also obviously ask me questions on Twitter at any time. Slide into those DMs. I'm usually pretty available. Just trying to help you help you make a final playoff push, and then hopefully win a championship this season. And in terms of waffles, since we're having that discussion, I actually prefer the Eggo waffle, cinnamon thick and fluffy variety over Waffle House. So
I haven't tried those yet.
Yeah,
I will check it out.
Delicious.
Thick and fluffy. That's exactly how I like my waffles. Well, let's go ahead and jump right in. We teased it a little bit talking about Lamar Jackson here, but one of my favorite matchups of this week is Baltimore at Cleveland. Right now, Cleveland are 2.5-point favorites, which I don't know. That's kind of a weird one there. I wasn't sure exactly how that spread was going to work out. We're looking at a 42-point over-under, so it shouldn't be too high scoring. We already talked about Lamar Jackson, but what I also want to talk about is Devonta Freeman. And Matt, I'll throw this question to you first. It seems like historically, sometimes we're a bit slow to recognize trends, but one trend that I see right now is that Devonta Freeman is taking over this backfield. Last week, he saw his season high in snaps, while Latavius Murray saw his season low in snaps. So how high are you willing to rank Devonta Freeman heading into this matchup?
Oh man, it's not like I want to be high on him because I don't think it's a great situation for him overall. Like he's near the end of his career, but the running back position has been hit so hard with injuries that I feel like all of these guys who ordinarily would be RB3s have been bumped up to the RB2 territory. And so that's where Devonta Freeman is for me. I have him as a sort of mid-range RB2 this week, in part because of the usage, in part because so many other guys are injured. And as you mentioned, Latavius Murray, basically a non-entity now within that backfield. Yeah, I mean, like anywhere from 18 to 24, I feel like would be the right range to rank him. And I feel like that's disgusting, but that's just how it is.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, there have been just injuries galore this week, which does make it pretty tough. But something that really jumped out to me when looking at Devonta Freeman's usage were his targets over the last few weeks. I mean, this was the biggest knock for every Ravens running back in the offseason. And now suddenly Devonta Freeman is getting that usage. Last week he saw 8 targets. The week before he saw just 1, but then prior to that, 6 targets, 4 targets, 3 targets. So he's getting some receiving work out of the backfield, which is kind of shocking to see in this Ravens offense. But let's switch to the other side of the ball here and talk a little bit about the Browns. Adam, Baker Mayfield has struggled lately. I'm just looking across the entire board here, talking about all the tight ends, all the receivers. Should we just kind of drop every single pass catcher in Cleveland down a tier at this point because of Baker Mayfield's struggles?
It's an interesting question. And I think this week is the one week that you probably can't do that, right? The Ravens are susceptible to the big play that gives you the Donovan Peoples-Jones kind of a dart throw flex if you're looking for a guy with the upside to hit a 50-yard touchdown, going down the sideline or something. Also, David Njoku's on the COVID list and Harrison Bryant's been ruled out. That's going to give Austin Hooper, it's going to give him the opportunity to see upwards of 7-8 targets in this game, I think. The Ravens allow the 3rd or 4th most points, fantasy points to the tight end position. So with him, the only game in town, look what he did, when he was with the Falcons a couple of years ago, is the only game in town. Like there's going to be opportunity there for him. And I've been getting a lot of Tyler Conklin versus Austin Hooper questions. I do want to talk about Tyler Conklin, but I'll let us go there in a little bit. But it's pretty close for me. But he's a guy that I would start probably and be pretty confident as a low-end tight end 1 if I didn't have a better option this week.
Can I just say something?
Really
just
like
jumping in,
out.
Really quickly. I want to say, like, taking a step back from reality, go back to the beginning of the season and imagine going and telling yourself in week 14, you're going to say the statement, I want to talk about Tyler Conklin. Like that, like this is, and I'm going to be comparing him to Austin Hooper. And like, this is the unreality of where we are at this point in the season. We're talking about these guys, and it's a real conversation.
We're talking about a real conversation. Do we start Devonta Freeman over Dalvin Cook, Matt? That's a real question.
Yeah.
Right?
Dontrell Hilliard. I don't even think people knew who Dontrell Hilliard was in this offseason, and now he's becoming like a smash RB2 in everybody's rankings. So yeah, this is
Dontrell Hilliard versus Foreman because there's no Derrick Henry.
Oh,
or Jeremy McNichols.
We're gonna get to that game. We're gonna get to that game too, right, Dave?
Yeah, we'll cover that game. I got that game on the slate. We'll talk about that one. That's cool. Definitely a fun one. The last thing I want to talk about, though, in this Cleveland and Baltimore matchup is Kareem Hunt, because he was limited to just 38% of the team snaps last week and only saw 8 touches. Now, he was coming off an injury, so I am kind of assuming here that he was just getting ramped up while he was up to full speed. Matt, I want to ask you, though, do you expect him to hit the over on both of those? 38% of the snaps, 8 touches. Do you think he's a little bit more involved this week against the Ravens?
Yeah, more involved, but I still don't think super involved. Nick Chubb is playing really well. I have him, in that RB2, RB3 borderline type of range. So I have him behind Devonta Freeman, which just feels so wrong because Kareem Hunt is clearly the better player. But, because of his situation, he could play 40% of the snaps and we'll say get 10 to 12 touches. But I don't think he's going to go off or anything like that. He is what he always has been, while he's been in Cleveland, a high floor RB2.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the frustrating thing. And last year, when Nick Chubb was out, he was actually averaging fewer points per game than he was when he had the backfield to himself. So he still does have some opportunity here with Nick Chubb. But yeah, it's kind of frustrating knowing that he's still under contract there for a few more years. We're not going to get to see him with the full load that he had as a rookie when he was just explosive. We haven't seen that since. I mean, it's frustrating to see.
It's essentially a similar situation with Tony Pollard and Zeke Elliott. When Zeke was out that last season, Tony Pollard rushed like 25 times for like 70 yards or something. So you get similar situation when the guy who's kind of the secondary support back takes on the lead role and doesn't average the same yards per carry and just doesn't put up the same kind of fantasy points.
Yep, we see it all too often. Now, before we move to the next game, I just want to get your predictions on this one from each of you. So, like I said, Cleveland, 2.5-point favorites here. Are you guys taking Cleveland or are you taking Baltimore in this matchup? Matt, go ahead and hit us first.
I love the Ravens in this spot. Lamar Jackson is 5-1 against the spread for his career as a road underdog. I mean, you just do not put him in this situation. Like, I think the market is a little too pessimistic on what he's going to do in this game.
I agree very much so. Adam, are we 3 for 3 on this one with the Ravens, or are you taking the Browns here?
We are, because I think the market sees the 4 interceptions that Lamar threw a week ago and is on the Browns for whatever reason. But yeah, I don't bet against Lamar Jackson with a spread like that.
Yeah, I am sensing a big bounce back week. Now let's talk a little bit about Dallas and Washington, and we already kind of talked a little bit about the Zeke and Pollard situation, and let's just go ahead and stick with that. Tony Pollard is starting to siphon more and more touches from Zeke every single week. In 4 consecutive games, Tony Pollard has finished with more rushing yards and more scrimmage yards despite being out-snapped in each game. So right now we're dealing with this injury concern where he said that he had torn the plantar fascia on his foot. He isn't 100% sure if he's going to play this week. Adam, let me start with you. If he does play this week, are you confident firing him up as an RB2, or are we supposed to push him down a little bit because of these injury concerns?
I think we're pushing him down a little bit because of the injury concerns. I think he sees if before he was playing on 40% of the snaps, it's possible that because of this, he plays somewhere closer to 25 to 30% of the snaps. And I don't think he sees as many touches. I mean, there's series that he gets where he's just on the field for 4, 5, 6 snaps at a time. I'm not sure if he's got this lingering issue that he's going to be out there for a series at a time. I could see Zeke taking on more of a workload, especially as the Cowboys and Jerry Jones sort of, let us know that's what they want to do down the stretch. Zeke doesn't look super healthy, but I mean, he's not dealing with the torn plantar fascia either. So I do think you have to knock down Tony Pollard just a little bit after he rose up to like RB20 a week ago and wouldn't have hit value unless he hit that 60-yard run in which he tore his plantar fascia on. So yeah, it's probably more like an RB30 for me at this point this week.
All right. And the thing with Zeke, I don't think he has any specific injury. I think it's just the miles are finally catching up to him. We might start seeing this over the next couple of years, where as the season goes on, his production is going to take a little bit of a nosedive. I mean, he's got a lot of miles on those legs. But Matt, I want to talk to you a little bit about Amari Cooper because not last week, but 2 weeks ago when they played, he was limited to just 1/3 of the team's offensive snaps. He had a couple catches, and one of them was a pretty big catch that he crossed across the middle of the field, which somewhat salvaged his day. But really, he's just been bothered by injuries throughout this entire season. Kind of like Zeke, it might just be an age thing and a usage thing. So if he's active this week, are you confident plugging him in, or are you a little bit worried about these injuries we've seen recently?
Yeah, I'm not confident plugging him in, but I think you still have to start him. He's a wide receiver too in that range. One of the things that gives me a little bit of pause is that I think Michael Gallup in how he's returned, how he's been used. I don't want to say he's better than Amari Cooper because if both guys are healthy, Cooper is better. But Gallup, within the context of his usage with Dak Prescott as quarterback and with Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator, he has 71.6 receiving yards per game with Dak. Amari has 70.5. Like, in terms of their production on the field as yardage accumulators, they're basically identical. And Gallup is the healthier guy right now. So, I mean, I'm not saying I'm ranking Gallup ahead of Amari Cooper, but I am concerned that there is downside. Like, there's risk with Amari Cooper because of the injury, and then because they can easily funnel a whole bunch of targets to Gallup, and he can basically give them Amari Cooper type of production. So I have him as a mid-range wide receiver too, but I am acknowledging there is significant downside risk with him.
That is a fantastic point, and I'm just going to put you on the spot for a second here because when talking about Michael Gallup, I just get really excited. He is one of my favorite wide receivers in the league. Where is the dream landing spot for him heading into next year? We're not talking about this matchup. Heading into next year, where and I'll ask both of you guys this question: where do you want to see Michael Gallup land? Just as a fan, fantasy asset, whatever it may be. Where do you want to see Michael Gallup next year?
That's an interesting question. I haven't thought of that. I will say, just shooting from the hip, Green Bay, assuming that Aaron Rodgers is still there. And I know that's like a weird assumption, or just wherever it is that Aaron Rodgers goes, I would like to see Gallup go there too.
Unless it's Denver, because I don't need Sutton, Gallup, Judy, and Alberto. I don't need all them vying for targets. But that would be a dream connection there. Adam, same question to you. Where do you expect to see, or where do you want to see Michael Gallup play next season?
I think Philadelphia makes a lot of sense, and I'm not just saying that as a homer.
It's funny because the Bears are exactly where I want to see
the
him.
The Eagles need a second wide receiver, outside Devonta Smith. Jalen Reagor's not it. Quez Watkins is fine. He's not the second. He can't be a second option. So I think the Eagles make a lot of sense, to be honest.
Okay, one second. If I knew that I could go with the homerism, I would just say, as the Cowboys fan, that he stays with the Cowboys, because I honestly do think that is a pretty decent fit. Like he's done well there within a limited capacity. If Amari Cooper leaves and Michael Gallup has the chance really to be that locked in number 2 guy, I think that would be a really good role for him.
Yeah, and I think CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup, just as a 1-2 punch with Amari out of the picture, would still be one of the best receiving duos in the NFL. So with Dak staying there, him already having the chemistry, I could see that definitely working out. Last thing I want to talk about in this game, though, is Taylor Heinicke, who has very quietly been producing this year. Over the last 3 weeks, Taylor Heinicke, believe it or not, is the QB7 in fantasy football. So I just want to ask you guys where you're willing to rank him. I think most people are kind of throwing him in as like a middling QB2. Are you willing to go above or below that this week? I'll ask each of you guys this question because I'm really intrigued, because Taylor Heinicke is a guy that I'm struggling to put into my rankings. So Matt, how are you feeling about Taylor Heinicke this week?
Yeah, since he became the starter for Washington in week 2, he has been on that QB1, QB2 borderline. I'm not putting him there this week. I'm just still ranking him down a little bit under that sort of like high-end-ish QB2, but he certainly does have that upside, and a big part of it is his running ability. The thing is, he's kind of inconsistent with when he runs. He doesn't do it every game the way that like Taysom Hill does, for instance. Like if he's out there, Taysom Hill is running. Heinicke some games just doesn't leave the pocket, and it's a little bit weird, but he has that skill set, which means he does have that upside. So like I view him as a QB2 with significant upside.
Yeah, and I'm thinking specifically about that game against the Packers where you had 10 rushes, almost cracked 100 yards, and you're like, wow, like we got a Konami code guy here with Taylor Heinicke, and then 1 rush for 10 yards the very next week. So yeah, it's very sporadic and tough to predict. But Adam, how are you feeling about Heinicke? Is he somebody that you're willing to fire up pretty confidently in a single quarterback league, or is he still a 2 QB super flex guy?
I think he's still a 2 QB super flex guy for me. And I don't know that we have a Konami code quarterback here. I think it's more a product of what defenses are giving him. I don't think the Washington football team is necessarily drawing up plays for Taylor Heinicke to run the football, but they're giving him the freedom to do so if he sees an opening, which I think is an underrated aspect of a quarterback. And that's what I think makes him so good, is his ability to, generate those yards with his legs. But I think this game's got too high of an over-under for a divisional matchup in Washington. It's going to be cold. I think this game goes under the 48. And there's quarterbacks around the same range that I like a little bit more than Heinicke. Joe Burrow's got a really good matchup. Cam Newton I would take over Heinicke. Taysom Hill I would take over Heinicke, because these guys I know are going to run the football. So I just think I think he's more of a mid to low end QB2 than some of those other guys that have a little bit more upside for me.
All right, let's go ahead and get your predictions on this game then. We've got the Cowboys 4-point favorites on the road in Washington. Do you think that they can cover that 4 points? What are you thinking, Matt? I know you're a Cowboys fan, and sometimes it's tough when you're talking about your own team here, but how are you feeling? 4 points, can they cover that?
I opened the season 0-5 betting against the Cowboys. And then I started switching and betting on them, and then they started losing. So you do not want my opinion, or maybe you do want my opinion, and then you just bet the exact opposite of what I say. But I actually do like them in this game. And part of the hallmark of Dak Prescott's career is that he is dominated, like absolutely crushed within divisional play. And against the spread, you see that reflected. He is 19-8 against the spread within division for his career. So I like him in the spot. I like the matchup and the passing game that the Cowboys have going against a Washington defense that we all expected at the beginning of the season to be really stout. And they haven't done it, especially on the back end. That defense hasn't been able to stick. And now that we have Tyron Smith at left tackle, we have all three starting wide receivers for the Cowboys. I do think this is a spot where they push their advantage through the air and really exploit a defense that is underwhelmed.
I agree with you. And it's funny that you say that about the Cowboys, because one of my few rules when it comes to betting is I am done betting on Bears games. Like I just cannot be objective when it comes to betting on my own Bears. So I just give up completely because I'd hit all my bets and then miss that one every single week. Adam, same question to you though. Cowboys 4.5 or 4 points. Who are you taking in this one?
We're talking about a home dog at +4. I love that number. I'm going to go with Washington here. I've watched too many NFC East in division games, and I know that Washington always plays the Cowboys pretty hard. And I think Washington's defense has really stepped up their game in the last few weeks with Chase Young going down. It's actually gotten better. I think we've seen them step up a little bit, and I like that number, and I like the fact that they're home in a cold weather climate. I'm going to go with Washington in this game.
Yeah, I'm taking Washington here too, but it should be a fun game nonetheless. One game that probably won't be as fun this week has the biggest spread of the week. Green Bay 12.5-point favorites over Chicago. Just absolutely disgusting, but that's kind of what you expect in this matchup. But I want to talk about some of the fantasy implications here. Justin Fields was named the starter for this week after being medically cleared from his rib injury. He's been pretty hot or cold this season. He's had some weeks where he's finished as a high-end QB1. He's had other weeks where he has just completely nuked your fantasy roster. So, Adam, start us off here. How are you ranking Justin Fields this week?
Well, first off, congratulations to all those who took advantage of Green Bay defense being on a bye last week and picked them up proactively, hoping that Justin Fields would be starting this game because he's got. I mean, this guy he takes so many sacks. He's interception prone. The only game that he went over 25 fantasy points was where he rushed for 103 yards and a touchdown. He hasn't thrown for more than one touchdown in any one game. There's no possible. I mean, there's no possible way that you could start this guy in Green Bay, right? Like for me, I call Taylor Heineke kind of a middling QB2, low end QB2. I'd go with Taylor Heineke over Justin Fields, for example.
Yeah, it's a tough pill to swallow, but I am with you on that. But let's talk a little bit about Darnell Mooney because he has been red hot over the last few weeks playing with Andy Dalton. But now, you just talked about it, Adam. There are some concerns with Justin Fields coming back under center now. So, Matt, are we still firing up Darnell Mooney as a wide receiver too, or is he just unstartable now that Fields is quarterback?
I don't think he's unstartable, but you certainly have to adjust your expectations down. Like the median projection obviously drops, and then his floor is much lower. Like the downside risk is, the risk is that he has 120 air yards and 0 reception. Like that's within the range of outcomes, given the scenario that we have here. And it doesn't help that, potentially Allen Robinson might return this week. Potentially Marquise Goodwin coming back this week. So even though with those guys there, he's still the number one receiver in terms of targets, air yards, all of the opportunities. He's still the number one receiver, but he won't have quite the target share that he would have, if those guys aren't there, and he doesn't have the, professional
quality,
professional veteran throwing to him. So certainly, you have to knock him down. I mean, that said, I still think he's on that wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 borderline. But I mean, there's just much more volatility within his range of outcomes now that we have this situation.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head talking about the volatility there. I mean, if he goes off for 25 points, I don't think it would shock anybody. And if he puts up 0, I also don't think that would shock anybody. He is definitely one of the most boomer bust players of the week.
I think Matt, before you go any further, I think Matt hit the nail on the head. I think it's way more Allen Robinson playing than it is Justin Fields being the quarterback. because in 2 of the last 3 games that Allen Robinson did not play, Darnell Mooney went for over 100 yards.
Mhm.
In the 4 games prior with Allen Robinson and Justin Fields starting quarterback, Darnell Mooney averaged 47.3 receiving yards per game. So they play on Sunday night too. Like I can't if Allen Robinson's expecting to play and I'm like waiting it out and I have a better, wide receiver 3 option than Mooney, I'd probably go that direction, to be honest with you.
Yeah. And it's kind of weird. It's almost like Allen Robinson is just like he impedes this entire offense. Like he doesn't command any targets, and somehow the entire offense was sputtering when he was out there. Definitely that was my biggest whiff of the offseason. I wrote an article about how this guy's just been quarterback proof since college. Doesn't matter who's throwing him the ball, he's going to get 150 targets and 1,000 yards, and got egg on my face that one.
There's only 2 people I'm confident starting in Chicago. And it's only one, depending on the situation. One, David Montgomery, if he's playing, and one, Khalil Herbert, if David Montgomery sits.
Yeah, that's pretty spot on. Well, let's talk about these Green Bay running backs. And Adam, I'll start with you. Similarly to that Pollard Zeke discussion that we had earlier, AJ Dillon, who started the season as the backup, has just been balling out lately. So Aaron Jones now coming off the bye should be fully healed from this MCL sprain. But how are you ranking these guys? I mean, it seems like the gap, it seemed like Aaron Jones was a top 5 guy. AJ Dillon was an RB3, and it seems like that is starting to get a little bit closer. So are you confident starting both of these guys this week?
Yeah, I am. If I had both of these guys and didn't have a better, say, top 15 or so option, I'd be rolling them both out there because I don't want to choose one over the other. And I think both could put up 15 plus fantasy points in this one. 12.5 point spread tells me that they're going to run the football. When both are healthy, it's Aaron Jones who gets the targets, which are obviously more valuable for fantasy football. Averages almost 5 targets per game with AJ Dillon between weeks 1 and 9, I believe it was. And AJ Dillon was only at 1.8 targets per game. So AJ Dillon's going to be that kind of grinder down the stretch.
Mm-hmm.
Look for him to see, 15 plus carries and only a target or 2 potentially, but both likely get in the end zone in this game. So I'm more than comfortable starting both. But if I had to choose, I'd probably go Aaron Jones just because if the game's a little bit more competitive, I could see Aaron Jones getting the targets.
Yeah. And Matt, you've talked about range of outcomes a few times here. I think looking at these guys, Aaron Jones has the really wide range of outcomes, but given his pass catching ability and for whatever reason, he's still the goal line favorite. I think both of those characteristics make him, the must start with a much higher ceiling, but I'm fully expecting AJ Dillon to get more carries in this game. So I think AJ Dillon actually has the safer floor of the two, but I think that Aaron Jones' ceiling is undeniable. And that's why you're still firing him up confidently as an RB1. Last thing I want to talk about in this game, though, is Marquez Valdes-Scantling. It seems like every couple of years, we end up falling into this trap, but he's seen 9+ targets in back-to-back games. Matt, are we sipping the Kool-Aid, or is this just a complete fluke?
I'm not doing it. Okay. I'm not starting him. I'll say I'm not starting him because I have no exposure to MVS in general. So it makes it easy not to start him. But I just want none of what he's offering. And even with the target volume, I feel that it's fake. And I know like target volume, like it's relatively sticky in comparison to yardage, for instance, but I'm not buying it. I think that at some point it evaporates. There are better people who should be getting the ball relative to MVS. And okay, I have him ranked on that like wide receiver 3 flex borderline. So if you have him, there's a decent chance that you're starting him, but you hate yourself anytime MVS is in your starting lineup because you just know that there's a decent chance you're going to have 2 receptions for 25 yards and no touchdowns. And you're thinking, why did I do this to myself? Okay. You did it to yourself because you didn't draft better. That's why you did it to yourself. But yeah, MVS, I mean, you rank him wherever you have to, but like, I don't want to start him.
So let me throw out a hypothetical start sit. And both guys we've just discussed, MVS or Darnell Mooney, who are you starting this week between the two?
Yeah. Mooney, easily I'm starting Mooney.
All right. Adam, you start Mooney as well?
Yes, I think it's interesting. I think if Allen Robinson plays, I think you have more of a case for Valdes-Scantling, honestly. But at the end of the day, I probably would go Mooney because I think there's a much safer floor there. Mooney's gonna get you 8-9 points minimum, likely. Valdes-Scantling, like Matt said, could go 1 for 20, right? And have 100 air yards and just Rodgers is like pissed off because he didn't run the right route or something. Like, there's no way that you can start that.
I think part of MVS's increase over the last couple of weeks was seriously because Aaron Jones was out. I mean, I know they play different positions, but somebody needed to take on that, number 2 pass catching role, and that is typically Aaron Jones. So I think that is kind of why we saw this. But before we move on to the next game, let me get predictions on this. We already talked about it. Green Bay 12.5-point favorites. Do they cover 12.5 points at home? Adam, what do you think?
No, I typically don't take favorites that are with that big of a spread. So I'm going to go with the dog and take Chicago.
All right, Matt.
I love this. This is great. This is one of my favorite bets of the year, and it's so square. Of course, I'm betting on the Packers in this spot. Ooh. I know it is incredibly square. I do not care at all. Aaron Rodgers at home, yeah, like I'm going to be betting on him, right, for his career. And it's like, how much time do you have? Because I could talk about this for 5 minutes. For his career at home, he's 67-34-4 against the spread. Against the NFC North, he's 48-28 against the spread. And when he's at home against division, 24-12 against the spread. Coming off of the bye, 11-5-1 against the spread. Against the division opponents, 5-0 against the spread off of the bye. And that doesn't even take into account the Bears. Like, sorry, Dave. Sorry. He does own the Bears. He literally he's going to retire. And then at that point he will buy the Bears just so he can literally own them. But before that happens on the field, he owns them. He is 20-7 against the spread against the Bears for his career. Like, if you were just a Rodgers better, you just blindly bet Rodgers anytime he played, the Bears would be the most generous team. Like, literally, like they would have given you the most money out of all of the teams that you could have bet against in that scenario. And with Matt Nagy, I don't need to tell you this. Rodgers is 5-0 against the spread against Matt Nagy. Like, I'm going to be betting on Aaron Rodgers in this situation. I know it's a ridiculous number for me to take. I don't care. I have no respect for the Bears and Aaron Rodgers at home, Aaron Rodgers within division. You put those two things together, you couldn't set this number too high for me.
And one factor that you didn't even mention is that this, if we're going to talk about him possibly leaving, this is the last time he is probably ever going to face against the Chicago Bears in Lambeau. You better believe that he's going to try to put a big old emphasis on this game. So I'm with you. Like I said, I have not done well betting on or against the Bears so far this year, but yeah, this definitely seems like it is going to be an absolute bloodbath. I could see the Packers winning this one by 30. Let's go on to the next one, though, because now I'm sad talking about my Bears getting throttled this week on a national stage. Jacksonville and Tennessee. This is the sexiest game, but we've got a lot of very interesting fantasy things to talk about in this one. And Adam, I'll start off with you on here. First things first, which Tennessee running back is going to lead the Tennessee backfield in fantasy points this week?
ESPN's Titans beat writer Teron Davenport thinks that Dontrell Hilliard is going to lead the Tennessee backfield in rushing for the remainder of the season, not just this week. So as the resident Dontrell Hilliard stan of a couple weeks back, mixed with Teron's report, I'm going to have to say that Dontrell Hilliard is the back that I'd rather start. With Deontay Foreman, you're banking on that game script being exactly what the spread tells you it's going to be. I don't think that Jeremy McNichols coming back really has much of an effect on either of these guys. To be honest, I think Jeremy McNichols was used because he had to be used. I don't think he's a very good running back. I think he's okay in pass pro, but I think Dontrell Hilliard can also work in pass pro, as he showed a couple weeks back. So if you're looking for a guy that can pop a 50-yard run, that's Dontrell Hilliard. But Deontay Foreman's going to be there on the goal line. I think both guys, like in Green Bay, I think both guys are startable. Actually, in one of my leagues, I'm starting both those guys, to be honest with you. I don't have better options because it's week 14. We've got a lot of running backs on the bye, and I've got to start 3 running backs, and I've got both Foreman and Hilliard, and I have to start them both. And I'm not comfortable with it, but I'm okay with it. We saw 65% of the Titans' plays in week 12 go for runs, and Ryan Tannehill only threw the ball 21 times. So they ran the ball 39 times. Ryan Tannehill only threw it 21 times. The Jaguars have allowed 140 yards on the ground the last 4 games. They're bad on the ground. So I think both these guys have a chance to put up, another 80 plus yards and a score each potentially.
Yeah, and we saw it last week, so hey, maybe we see it again against this Jacksonville team. But Matt, I want to talk about the Jacksonville backfield now a little bit. I just kind of want to fly through this game so we can talk about tonight's matchup here because there's a lot to talk about in that one. But I want to talk about James Robinson because I've seen this guy. I mean, he's been putting up low-end RB1 numbers all season. And then over the last 2 weeks, he has been benched for fumbles, which is just totally head-scratching. So I've heard two narratives. One is saying you shouldn't start him because Urban Meyer is a psychopath and you don't know what he's going to do. And then the other one I've heard is Urban Meyer is going to atone for these mistakes that he's made over the last 2 weeks by feeding James Robinson the rock. But I want to hear kind of where you have him in your rankings and three guys that you might think about starting ahead of James Robinson this week.
Interesting. So I have Robinson, I think around like RB20. And he's been dealing with some injuries, like the heel injury. And, even with that, they were still giving him some carries at the end of the 37-7 loss last week. But, it's worth noting for whatever, I don't think this is super predictive, but, in week 5 against the Titans, he did go off. That was like his best game of the year, season high marks with 18 carries, 149 yards rushing. He's a very good running back. We know that, but yeah, there are issues with the injury and with also Urban Meyer. So guys that I would start ahead of him.
Don't say Devonta Freeman. We've talked about Freeman enough on this show.
Okay. But that's number one.
Seriously,
I don't need to say it, but that's number. I would start him above James Robinson right now. AJ Dillon, definitely in the conversation. I mean, it's too simple to say like Ezekiel Elliott, but like I have Zeke so far down in my rankings that it's actually kind of close between those two guys.
Now let me throw another one out there. Jamal Williams is a guy that seems to be kind of polarizing. So this week, James Robinson, Jamal Williams, who would you take there?
Okay, that was exactly the guy I was going to say next. Like I think it's a coin flip between those two guys right now, especially with us, not knowing what's happening with DeAndre Swift. It sounds so disgusting to say Jamal Williams over James Robinson, but it's certainly a conversation, and I would probably still go with James Robinson, but for me, like that's the cutoff point.
All right. I'll give Adam an opportunity to respond here because I saw you shaking your head a little bit. I think Adam's more just go ahead and fire him up this week, huh?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a squeaky wheel here going on. If you want to, you drafted Trevor Lawrence number 1 overall. Trevor Lawrence just came out and backed his running back and said he's the best. He's the best player on the field. They're gonna, if they want to please Trevor Lawrence, they have to find ways to keep James Robinson on the field. I think he's going to see a ton of work in this game. There's no way I would start Jamal Williams at Denver over James Robinson this week because Jamal Williams played. I mean, he had 17 carries last week, but only played 47% of the snaps. And Godwin Igwebuike ran like triple the amount of routes that he did. So we expected with DeAndre Swift out that Jamal Williams was going to see all these targets. That wasn't the case. He wasn't even on the field in passing down situations. So James Robinson likely will be on the field during those situations. And I think it's a decent matchup for him, even though they're obviously 8.5-point underdogs. But when your franchise quarterback says that James Robinson is the best player on the field, I think you have to keep him on the field. I think we see him have one of his highest snap shares this week.
Yeah, another player with a huge range of outcomes. But let's go ahead and get on the predictions for this one. Tennessee, 8.5-point favorites. Matt, are you taking Tennessee or Jacksonville in this one?
I'm going to cheat and say neither. This is one that I'm actually not betting. But if I had to take a side on it, I would probably go Tennessee, and that's not so much to do with them. It's more to do with the total lack of respect that I have for Urban Meyer and what he's doing with that franchise.
I completely agree with you. Adam, Tennessee or Jacksonville?
I'm with you, Tennessee, because I don't trust anything that Jacksonville's doing. I think Tennessee's actually a well-run organization, good head coach. They're going to pound the football, decent defense. I'll take Tennessee and I'll eat the points.
All right. Now let's talk about tonight's game. Finally, we got football kicking off in just a few hours here. And this is insane that I'm even asking this question, but Pat Freiermuth has been on fire. Last week, he didn't have a huge fantasy output, but he had a pretty crucial 2-point conversion. And, he's been seeing targets. He looks like next to Deontay Johnson, he's becoming the second favorite target in Pittsburgh. So, like I said, this is crazy to ask, but can we start ranking Pat Freiermuth ahead of Kyle Pitts? Matt, what do you think? I'm not talking about dynasty. I'm just talking about weekly rankings. Who are you more comfortable starting this week?
I think I think there's a case to be made. Like you could do it. I have Pitts one spot ahead of Freiermuth. So like that's where we are. If someone had Freiermuth ranked ahead of Pitts, I wouldn't argue with them, right? Now I would say that most analysts, if you're probably looking at Fantasy Pros or wherever, most analysts probably still have Pitts ahead of Freiermuth, but I bet that they are neck and neck within almost all of those rankings, which means that, yeah, you could make the case for Freiermuth easily ahead of Pitts, especially because his offense is funneling the ball to him near the goal line, and like touchdowns can be very fluky, but when a guy's getting red zone and end zone targets, that tends to be a little stickier. And Pitts, like his offense just isn't affording him those opportunities to score touchdowns.
Yeah, over the last 6 weeks, this blew my mind. I'm not talking about targets. I'm talking about overall touch. Has more red zone touches than Najee Harris does. When they get close to the goal line, that is who they are trying to get the ball to. So I do have Freiermuth ahead of Pitts this week, and it is kind of crazy to think that that's even a discussion that we'd be having. But hey, here we are. Adam, question I got for you, though, is about another guy on this Pittsburgh offense. Chase Claypool in week 5, he had 130 yards and a touchdown. And, that's kind of what we were hoping for when we drafted Chase Claypool this offseason. Since then, though, he is averaging 53.2 scoreless yards per game. Is it time to just bench him, or are you still keeping him in your lineup every single week?
Yeah, it's a tough one. He's a little banged up. He didn't play as many snaps last week. Ray McLeod and was it James Washington? Is that who? I believe ran more routes than Chase Claypool. He's obviously got the higher ceiling than those guys. But on a short week, if you have better options, you could possibly sit him, but just understand that he could go for 100 and a touchdown at any given time. So, I would probably still start him, especially because I like watching my good players play on Thursday night. But if you have better options, I wouldn't be mad at you if you sat Chase Claypool tonight.
And that is, I fall victim to that almost every single week where I make a last-minute swap, like 15 minutes before kickoff. I'm like, let me get a little skin in this game. And then
Tony Jones last week, right? Like,
yep.
2 weeks ago.
Well, let's talk about KJ Osborne here. And Matt, I'll throw this question to you. Adam Thielen is out for 3 to 5 weeks, and right now KJ Osborne is everybody's darling that they're just picking up and plugging in. How are you feeling? Is he fool's gold, or do you think that he's going to be the real deal? Somebody that you can actually count on as a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3?
I mean, I don't know if you can count on any like wide receiver 3 type of guy. Like, I think that's sort of like the definition of like this guy. Maybe he does something for you if like he's in the wide receiver 3 range. Like I have him ranked as a low end wide receiver 3. I think he gets decent target volume, obviously with Adam Thielen gone. I think he will be the number 2 receiving option, especially if Dalvin Cook is out. And even if Cook is in, I don't think he's going to play his full complement of snaps. So I don't think that we see like Dalvin Cook really still targets or anything like that from KJ Osborne. I do think he's the number 2 option as a pass catcher within that offense. And like to add some context to this, like I am betting the over on KJ Osborne's yardage prop for tonight, but like I don't think that I think I took it around 41.
All right.
I didn't get it as good of a number as some people got it when it first came out there. I was a little bit slow in the market, but I still think that there's value there. Like I think this number should probably be around like 48 or 49. I'd say like 44 at the lowest, but I think he has an okay game, not a great game, which is like, hey, this guy's a wide receiver 3.
Now let's close with what everybody that is watching the show today is probably dying to know. What the heck are we supposed to do with Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison? Obviously, the correct answer is just wait and hope that there is some sort of clarification. Hopefully they come out and they say, hey, Dalvin Cook is active, but he's an emergency role. Or Dalvin Cook is active and he is going to be the bell cow tonight. But if we don't get a report like that, Adam, what are we supposed to do tonight? Let's say you've got Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison. Who are you going to start? Or do you start both of them or none of them? What are we supposed to do here?
Man, that's a tough situation. I'm grateful I don't have to worry about that because I don't have Dalvin Cook or Alexander Mattison on any one of my teams, which could be good, it could be bad. But tonight it's looking like it's going to be bad, right? Because to try to make that decision, he could take one hit to the shoulder, and I assume Pittsburgh obviously knows this. They're not trying to injure him, but they're going to give him a couple shots to the shoulder, right? And see what happens. See if he can stay in the game. He's a volatile play, but I would say if the Vikings are saying that they're going to put him out there on a short week, I think that they're trusting that he's going to play a significant role in this game. unless we hear from Jay Glazer that this is a Darrell Henderson situation, like last week, and he's just an emergency active, and Sony Michel gets the majority of the work, like Alexander Madison would tonight. I think you have to fire up Dalvin Cook because I don't think you want to see 150 yards and a touchdown on your bench.
Yeah. And it's kind of tough. I feel like I'd almost rather have 20 points on my bench than 0 points in my starting lineup. That's kind of how I'm looking at this and why I'm just thinking about benching Dalvin Cook. But Matt, before we sign off here, help us out. Try to give us any clarity that we didn't just hear from Adam. What are we supposed to do with this running back situation this evening?
Unless I would actually go the opposite direction, unless we have clarity that Dalvin Cook is starting, like they are going to use him in the typical Dalvin Cook role, I think we actually see Alexander Madison be the slight lead back in the situation. And I'm thinking of when Dalvin Cook returned from injury in week 4, it was pretty much a split backfield between those two guys. And with it being a shorter week, I just feel a little more certain in Alexander Madison definitely being out there. And Cook, maybe he's in his partial role. I don't think he's going to end up being the full starter. Maybe he doesn't play. So right now I have Madison ranked as a low end RB2, and I have Cook in that RB3 range.
Yep, that's exactly where I have them, Matt. You and I are in lockstep on this one, but like I said, hopefully we get a little bit of clarity. Before we sign off, though, Matt, let's get your prediction for tonight's game. I don't think I mentioned this, but Minnesota is a 3-point favorite. Let's get your prediction for tonight's game and then let everyone know where they can find your content, where they can find your social media, and all that fun stuff.
So I'm betting on the Steelers as plus 3.5 road underdogs. Mike Tomlin has been fantastic throughout his career as an underdog. Like he feels like the type of guy who would thrive in the underdog spot with the chip on his shoulder. This is a perfect spot for him. And then road underdogs this year have also been crushing, across the league. So, you have sort of the micro and the macro aligning here. So I am very much on the Steelers in this spot. You can find all of my work at FTN. I have a fantasy football breakdown, which I publish on Friday, a best bets article, which I publish on Thursday, of course, rankings, which I update on Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday. And then we have a bet tracker where all throughout the week, I'm putting in my NFL sides, totals, and player props. You can find all of that at FTN, and you can follow me on Twitter at MattFTheOracle, a very unfortunate Twitter handle, which now I cannot change.
Well, the other thing I want to say is make sure you follow Matt on Twitter just for that August fantasy football draft thread. That is the thread of the year that you dropped. Just walking through round by round, kind of what your thought process is. So definitely worth a follow there. Adam, same question to you. Who are you picking tonight at 3.5 points? And then let everyone know where they can find your content and where they can find you on social media.
Oh, it's 3.5. Is that right?
I guess when I did this yesterday, it was at 3. Matt said 3.5, so I'm guessing the line has moved a little bit.
I'll take the dog at 3.5.
Yeah,
I like that. I'll go with Matt. At 3, I was going to go against him, but at 3.5, I'll take the dog. I think Mike Tomlin's too good of a coach, and on the short week, I like that. I like his matchup against the Vikings there. A couple notes that I wanted to add for this game. The last time Adam Thielen missed a game was last season. BC Johnson went for 7 catches for 74 yards on 7 targets. He had 7 targets. He had 19 the entire season. So more than a third of his targets came when Adam Thielen was out of the game. That KJ Osborne line, like you said, is way too low. So I love the KJ Osborne over on his yards prop. I'm also huge on Tyler Conklin. Last season,
sorry guys.
Yeah, no,
you're good.
You were laughing so hard that you went. but when the same game that Thielen missed last season, Kirk Cousins targeted his tight ends 11 times, and Kyle Rudolph, the dinosaur that Kyle Rudolph is last season, had a season high 68 yards on a season high 8 targets last game. And last week without Thielen, Conklin saw a season high 9 targets, 4 of which came in the red zone. So talk about a big red zone target without Adam Thielen there. Love Tyler Conklin tonight, and I would actually start Tyler Conklin over Pat Freiermuth.
Wow. Spicy take, but I like it. Let everyone know where they can find you on social media, where they can find your podcast, and where they can find all your written content, Adam.
Yep, at Adam Koffler. Most of my written content's on Rotoballer, some fantasy pros, like you said, some of the breaking news and news desk, and then my basketball podcast Monday mornings over at the Action Network, and obviously on Twitter at Adam Koffler.
Yep. Definitely recommend checking Adam out too. He is fantastic at just cramming a ton of actionable information into his tweets at Adam Koffler. And thank you to everyone that tuned in today. Just a reminder that you can find this show every single Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern. This is episode 24 of The Launchpad. Next week, I will be joined with Andrew Cooper and Joey Wright as we dive into some Week 15 matchups. So I will see you next Thursday, as always, at 4 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for tuning in.